in this final lesson of this series, we're going to do some minor improvements to some existing tests. First of all, I'm gonna go into vit.config.ts and remove configuration, which enabled coverage feature. In this lesson, we're not gonna need to generate coverage report. Also, another thing, if we'll switch over to package.json, in here we have a script defined to run all tests in the project called test, which enables us to run npm test in all tests in the project will be executed. But the Vitest execute tests in watch mode, so that means Vitest will keep running and watch for changes, and anytime we're going to change some files, it is going to execute tests again. But sometimes we don't need this, we just wanna run tests once, and for that I'm going to add another script called test::run, and in here we just have to additionally supply a command called run, like so. And if I'll try to run this command in the terminal, we can see that Vitest has run all tests, and at the end, the command has quit, so Vitest doesn't watch for changes. Next, let's open up file functions.test.ts, which contains one test where we have used mocks. In here we were using mocks to mock return values of two functions, function now which returns current date, and function random which returns random value. And to improve this test, we can also check how many times certain mocks have been called. For example, I'm going to store these mocks in constants. Let's call first one nowSpy to know which function this mock is mocking, and the second constant we'll call randomSpy. This mock is used to mock function random. And then we can write the following expectation. I'm gonna use expect and pass first mock, and then if we'll call to have been called method, this way we're checking if this mock has been called at least once. So now if we'll run only this one test by using modifier only, and indeed test is passed because our mock is called inside id function. But if we'll try to change function implementation by removing the call to method now, in this case, in a terminal we're going to see that test starts throwing an error, because we were expecting method now to be called at least once, which hasn't happened in this case. In addition to checking that mock is called at least once, we can also check if mock is called a certain number of times. And to do this, we have to use another method called to have been called times. And as an argument, we have to supply how many times we expect this mock to be called. In this case, I expected this mock to be called 2 times, but in fact, it has been called only once, hence we're seeing this error. And then I'm going to duplicate this expectation and do the same with another mock. We are expecting this mock to be called only once. And then let's remove this modifier only and run all tests. And they are all passing. The next thing that I would like to improve has nothing to do with tests. It is related to import statements, because in some files we are importing types without specifying keyword type. But whenever I import types, I actually prefer to include keyword type to make it clear that we are importing types. So I'm gonna add this keyword in here where we are importing activity type, as well as inside of another file. Here we are importing 2 types. Let's add this keyword in here as well. Next one. Before we have used modifier skip and only to specify which tests have to be skipped and which ones have to be executed. But in addition to those modifiers, we can also use modifiers skip if and run if, which allows us to add additional condition under which certain tests have to be skipped or run. For example, if we're using skip if, we can pass boolean value which indicates when this test has to be skipped. So if we will pass truthy value, this one will be skipped. And another similar modifier is called run if. This does the opposite. If we're gonna pass falsy value, this test will be skipped, otherwise it will be run. And let's also consider another modifier called fails. For example, if for some reason we expect some tests to fail. And if this failure is expected, for example, let's change this value to make this test fail. And it is currently failing. So if this change is intentional and we are expecting this test to fail, we can specify modifier fails to make test runner to not throw an error. Because we are expecting this failure, but in case the test where we are expecting the failure will not throw an error, test runner will show an error in the terminal. Another thing is that we can specify custom error messages for certain expectations. For example, if we are not satisfied with the default error message, we can additionally specify custom message that will be displayed right next to the default one. And to do so, we have to pass second argument into the expect function. So right here I'm going to specify custom description. That will be the reason which caused this expectation to fail. And in the terminal we are seeing our new description right next to the default one. So this is how we can specify additional error messages to any expectation by passing them as the second argument into expect function call. The next thing is related to parameterized tests. Whenever we were using parameterized tests, we were calling method each on the test object. So each time we had to import that test object, but in fact method each can also be called on the it object. And just because we are already importing it object into every test file, there is no need to import additional test object. So I'm gonna go through all the places where we are using test object and replace those with it objects. This way we're not changing any logic. And also let's not forget and remove imports of the test object, because we are no longer using it. And finally, there are a couple of test descriptions which can be improved. For example, for the test which checks function today, we're seeing that this function today does not accept any arguments, but in fact, our description says that it does accept one argument. So I prefer to change this description by simply saying that this test is checking that function today returns current date. And due to the same reason, I prefer to change the description of the second test, which tests function tomorrow. As we can see, function tomorrow does not accept any arguments. So let's rename this description and say that this test checks that function tomorrow returns date of tomorrow. And lastly, if we'll open up file activities.test.ts, here in the last test we're checking the function calculate activity completion percentage, which accepts 2 arguments, but in the description we are specifying that it accepts only 1. So I'll improve this description and literally specify activity word as the first parameter to match number of arguments that this function accepts. And those are all improvements that I was planning to do in this lesson. Since this was the last lesson of this series, let's run all tests in the project one last time, make sure that they're all passing, and let's finish this series. Link to the source code of every lesson will be in the video description.